We are going to look into the parables of Jesus. It's called Storyteller. And we are going to see these heavenly principles that are wrapped up in earthly stories. We're going to see these things that Jesus taught that even his disciples sometimes didn't understand. They had to ask him later. But they're these beautiful narratives. I love narrative. Every few months I have something that's wrapped around story because I love a story. And if you grew up in church, you know the story of our first one. It's the story of the Good Samaritan. And even those who didn't grow up in church know the cultural reference of the Good Samaritan. But I don't think people really understand just how shocking that story is. How to have Jesus tell this parable of a Good Samaritan is actually a big oxymoron. If you were a Jew living in this time, the very mention of the word Samaritan would make your skin crawl. The story of the Good Samaritan has been labeled a story of racism, and I can see that. It's very much. The Samaritans were considered half-breeds because the way it worked in the history of the country. When the nation was split, they went into exile during a time when they rejected God, both the nation of Israel and Judah. And what ended up happening was the captives that were taken were the best of the best. They were the artisans, they were the singers, the best, the smartest. Everyone who was the best of the best were what was taken off into captivity. And those that were left to just kind of be there. All of their leadership was gone, all of the good, and they were just kind of average people who ended up intermarrying with some of the Canaanites and others that were in that region. And so years later, decades later, whenever the Israelites started coming and returning back to their cities, they were allowed to return home, and they found there's this group of people who claim to be Jewish, but they're not of pure Jewish origin because they had intermarried. And so they were considered half-breeds. They were Samaritans. And it's not just that. Because we can look at that and say, well, they shouldn't have hated them for that. It wasn't their fault that their ancestors were not the smartest. But it's more than that. It actually goes quite a bit deeper. Because the Samaritans weren't just these down on their luck people. They actually did some things that were pretty bad against the Jewish people. Just a few years before this story was told, the Samaritans, during Passover, the temple was left open, and late at night, a group of Samaritans snuck into the temple, and they scattered remains, human remains, all over the temple, desecrating the holiest site to the Jewish people. So this was a bad thing. It wasn't like it was just, well, they're just down on their luck. No, they actually did some things. There is some deep-rooted tension between them. And even though they considered themselves followers of God by following the Torah, and because they could trace their lineage all the way back to Abraham, they considered themselves as being equal to the Jewish people. However, there was a tension between the Samaritans and the Jews. And that's just a quick little glimpse into that. But we aren't able to understand the gravity of this story because we don't have a problem with the Samaritans. There's no Samaritan that hurt my feelings. There's no Samaritan that did anything to me that made me dislike an entire group of people. All we know is that they didn't get along with the Jews, but it was so much deeper than that. So in order to understand their feelings towards this group, what we need to do is you need to find today's equivalent. And it might be something different for different people. But you find the equivalent in your life. Someone who you cannot see any good in. Someone who has wronged you. Or someone who because of the life that they live, you see no good in them. You can see how there's not any way that their life can be salvageable, that they could do any good because of their reputation, because of the life that they live. So now let's dive into the text. We're going to be in Luke chapter 10, beginning in verse 25. Now, setting it up, there's this lawyer, and this lawyer is an educated person. He wants to test Jesus. And there might have actually been something that he wanted to ask Jesus genuinely, but the way it sets up, it's like he's trying to trap Jesus. Verse 25, he said, "Behold, a lawyer stood up and put him to the test, saying, 'Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?'" Now, Jesus has a couple of options in how to answer this question. But if you look closely, the question itself doesn't make very much sense. How does someone inherit something? Well, you're included in the will, or you're not. You are part of the inheritance as a descendant, or you just aren't. So if that's what it is, there's not anything that can be done to earn an inheritance. And the thing is, that was not a new concept to the first century people. An inheritance cannot be earned. An inheritance is something that is a gift of grace, and it's something that we all know, that back then they knew that. They knew that if it was an inheritance, it was a gift of grace. So Jesus could have made him feel like an idiot by pointing this out. He could have said, bruh, really? How do you earn an inheritance? You know better. You're smart. But instead, Jesus takes a different approach. And this approach that he takes, because this guy is a lawyer, Jesus takes his strength and he kind of turns it and begins to engage him in his area of expertise. He begins to talk law in this guy's wheelhouse. Verse 26, he said to him, what is written in the law? How do you read it? Turns it right back on him. Okay, well, what's written in the law? You want to know all this? What's written in the law? And this guy answers him with a portion of the law that is so sacred. It is so, everybody in that culture would have known this. They would have recited it from the time they were little kids. It was at the heart of everything. Verse 27, he said, and he answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And this guy gets it. He seems to understand. He knows the law, and he is always, the law has always been about loving God and loving your neighbor. So doctrinally, he's correct. And we've talked about the rich young ruler and how he was following all the rules and everything, but he went away sad. That's not this story. This is a different moment altogether. The lawyer understands this, and Jesus congratulates him. He says to him, verse 28, you have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. And that's it. That's exactly the kind of life that Jesus came for us to live. One where we abandon ourselves for God and for others. So that's it. How do I inherit eternal life? Well, what are you supposed to do? What does the law say? Well, love the Lord your God with everything that's within you and your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus is like, congratulations, buddy. You got it right. Do that and you'll live. Thank you for coming to Ridge Community Church today. I'll see you next week. Oh, man, that's not how it ended. And some of you've got kids that kind of act this way. They got to get that last little question in. You give them an answer, and they take it just one step further. Well, that's where this guy is. He didn't just leave it at where Jesus left it. He took it one step further. Verse 29. But he, desiring to justify himself. It's like he was like, this is why I was asking this question. Of course, Jesus knew why he was asking, but desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Take a side step for just a second, because this is what legalism will do to us. Legalism. We have this endless series of questions about technicalities that keep us from dealing with the bigger picture. It really doesn't need to be explained what it means to love the people around us like we love ourselves. But what legalism does is it makes us go that one step further to ask that question, who is my neighbor? You shouldn't have to ask. Love your neighbor as yourself. Can you give me a list, Jesus? I really want to know who is my neighbor so I can make sure that when I see them, I know that's who I'm supposed to help. So you tell me who my neighbor is so I'll know. And that is really only half the question. The question that's not being asked is really at the heart of it. You want to know who your neighbor is so that you know who to help, but you want to know who your neighbor is so you want to know who isn't your neighbor, so you don't have to help them. Help me know who's not my neighbor so I don't waste my time helping them out. Can you help me with this, Jesus? That's legalism. There is a clear message. Love the Lord with everything that you are, and love your neighbor as yourself. But he was still looking for a loophole. He wasn't looking for a loophole to find a way to sin. He was looking for a loophole in a way that would keep him from doing the obvious thing, the hard thing, to love everyone regardless. Legalism always causes us to find boundaries that don't exist. Some people need to exist in these boundaries. They need legalism to explain to their rational minds how things can work out this way. Well, I need to know who my neighbor is, and I need to know who's not my neighbor. Because if I'm living by the rules and I do this right, then everything will be okay. If I love my neighbor, I can inherit eternal life. But they're not my neighbor, so I'm not going to love them. That's legalism. So who's my neighbor? And then Jesus dives in with this extremely controversial story, but beautiful. Verse 30, Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead." So this guy isn't all dead, he's only mostly dead. And I've seen this road where this took place. This is a road in Israel. It's a road that stretches from Jerusalem to Jericho. It's 37 miles down this road, and it was an ancient walking path, and it is called by another name. It's not called that in this, but it is. This is, you know it because David used the term for this road. That section is called the Valley of the Shadow of Death. And a lot of times we'll read that and see it as a metaphor. And we use it in our lives. Oh, I'm walking through the valley of the shadow of death right now, but I will fear no evil. But the reality is that was an actual road that was the valley of the shadow of death. It went through there. And it was difficult because there were a lot of winding turns and little pockets that people could hide in. It was the most direct route from Jerusalem to Jericho. And when people would do that, they would take that path. Or you could go around. You could go around and it would be an entire day's journey. Or you could go 37 miles on an animal and it wasn't quite that long. It was, only take you a few hours to get to Jericho. And that's the way people went. But it was risky. Robbers would hide in those little nooks and crevices and they would jump out and they would attack people. And it was dangerous. And it wasn't just dangerous back then. There are stories of people who traveled that road on foot as recent as the early 1900s. And robbers still did the same thing then. It's just how things were. It was one of the most dangerous roads in the Middle East. It was convenient for the enemy to hide. So the robbers beat this man almost to death. He is mostly dead. And that's what we know so far. Verse 31. Now by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. The priest. Now, I've read this story a lot of times, and I've preached about this before, but don't villainize the priest. Don't immediately villainize the priest like, oh, he's such a bad guy because he walked by the other way. He just ignored him. We villainize this priest, but I want us to think of it for a second. He's a priest. He's not a Pharisee. He wasn't one of the ones that were trying to tear down and discredit Jesus. Now, again, this is a parable, so this is a story that Jesus is telling. So whether this event actually happened, we don't know, but this is a parable that Jesus is telling. But we see that Jesus uses the example of a priest, not a Pharisee. So this priest is someone who had been doing his priestly duties in Jerusalem, which included things like caring for the poor, caring for the orphan and the widow. Those were his responsibilities. He has done good work. He gave it the office. We judged him harshly because we're like, well, he's a priest. He should have done what he should have helped the guy. I'm going to be completely transparent and vulnerable here. Not that I'm ever trying to shroud anything, but I just want to be, because I hope, I think that there's some other people in here with me. Some of y'all are way likely that you're way better than I am at this. But there have been times when I have been driving after a day of work or doing something, and I see somebody who has a flat tire in the median, and I drive by and I just kind of reach my hand over and say, Lord, send someone to help them. Now, it doesn't happen every time. There are times I stop and help, but I can know that there have been times that that's been me. So he keeps on moving without helping. It's important to see him this way, because if we over-villainize these people, then we fail to see ourselves in them. People like the priest aren't turning up their noses at people in need. I wouldn't be surprised if the priest struggled with what to do about this situation. His priestly duties require certain things. He has to remain clean. He's walking. He sees this guy laying on the side of the road. This guy looks dead. If he goes over and turns him over to check on if he's dead, and that guy is dead, he's now unclean. And he cannot do anything in the priest. He can't do his job for a week because he touched a dead body. So, oh man, somebody will come along that'll help him. I just gotta zip over here. So he passes him. Verse 32, likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. A Levite is not a priest, but is someone who performs priestly duties. He's someone who works at the temple. He does not have the same responsibilities as a priest, but the same rules kind of apply. The Levites were the ones who kind of dealt with the facility, the temple facility, the furniture and that kind of thing. But if he were to touch the dead body, he would be unclean in the same as the priest. And also, he might have been close enough to have seen the priest pass by, and he's like, look, I'm not showing up my boss. If he passed by, I'm going to follow his lead because he's the priest. So he ends up doing the same thing. And then, it comes to this third person, and here's where the controversy begins. The story would be controversial if the roles were reversed, and it were the Samaritan who was beaten on the side of the road, and the Jewish person stopped and helped them. It would still be controversial because the Samaritans were viewed as dirty, and it would have been acceptable for a Jew to pass a Samaritan who had been beaten. But Jesus takes that and he flips it upside down, and this is what's so controversial. Verse 33, in that way that I just said, that hypothetical way, the Samaritan being beaten, it would have been the Jew that would have been the hero of the story. And of course, that would have been okay, they like that. But this is what he says, verse 33, a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. Now, a lot of times I'll fumble over Greek words. I'm not even going to try this Greek word. I looked at it and thought, no way. But I'll tell you what it means. The Greek word for compassion there means to be moved in the inward parts. It means when this Samaritan saw this man beaten on the side of the road, his stomach sunk. He got that pit of the stomach feeling. I have to help him. Verse 34, he went to him, bound up his wounds, pouring oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. See how many things in the story have been reversed? This man will do everything that the priest and the Levite could have done and should have done but didn't do. He does the exact opposite of the people who should have been the example. And again, he was hated. He was a Samaritan. These are the most despicable people. Again, we can't forget, we label Samaritan and we're like, well, okay, they just had a bad view of who those people. I want you to think of the people who have hurt your family or whoever it is, and this certain group of people, you don't want anything to do with them. Put them in that scenario. Here's how much they hated them. There's a quote that's said about this. It says, he that eats the bread of Samaritans is like one that eats the flesh of swine. That's how much they hated him. And Jewish people, they don't eat pork. That's unclean. So if you even ate bread from a Samaritan, it's just as bad as eating pork. Now that's right back into that legalism. But these people were considered so unclean that you could not even eat their bread. But this guy uses his supplies to dress the wounds of this injured man. He pours wine on his wounds. Why? Because the alcohol would clean it and it wouldn't get infected. He pours oil on this guy. What's the oil do? It's soothing. It has healing properties. It helps with his pain. To receive the oil and the wine from a Samaritan was unclean. Then he puts this guy on his own animal, which is what the other two should have done, and he ends up taking care of him. Now, the Samaritan, he takes risks by doing this. There's a couple of things that could have happened because he was doing this. First of all, he could have been putting himself at risk for the same robbers. Those robbers might come along and see, all right, well, here's, I can't mess with the priest because, I got to be straight with God, so I'm going to let the priest go. Oh, there's a Levite, I still want to be good with God, so I'm going to let him go. But a Samaritan, I can get him. Oh, he's got wine and oil? Oh, yeah, that's mine now. So he could have been leaving himself vulnerable for robbers to have taken him and beaten him as well. But he also left himself vulnerable to misinformation. Because if he's down there, he's a Samaritan, and here he is standing over this man who had been beaten. Somebody else walks up and they say, look, it's a Samaritan. He just beat that guy. He just tried to kill him. So he's now suspect for something that he didn't do just because of who he is that he has no control over. He then has become suspect number one. So he puts himself at risk for attack, physical, and he puts himself at risk of being falsely accused. But he does it anyway. Verse 35, and the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him. Whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back. Jesus steps out of the narrative and he looks over at the young lawyer and he says, which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? The young lawyer said, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said, you go and do likewise. This is out of the ESV, English Standard. I like to read out of the ESV. When I'm listening to my morning Bible reading, I listen along in the NLT because on the Bible app, it has different voices. So it's almost like listening to radio theater sometimes, and I like that. But there's a bunch of different versions. But every once in a while, I like to go back to the King James. I won't say the original King James because most people don't have an idea. The 1611 King James is not the King James that people use today. Not to get into, but I go back to the King James because there's something about the poetic language there. I'm not a purist on one version of the Bible. If you're seeking God and you're reading His Word, you seek Him and you read His Word. Different people have different preferences. But this verse here in the King James, I love. It says, go ye therefore and do likewise. It just sounds so official. It sounds so regal. When Jesus says to this young man, He says, go ye therefore and do likewise. The scandal of this is not just that Jesus painted a favorable picture of a Samaritan. That was scandalous, but that wasn't the big thing. That verse was the big thing. Okay, so Jesus, you're making this Samaritan look good and all, and I don't really care for that. But then He says, go and do likewise. You go and be like him. Whoa. Is there any mystery now why they wanted to kill him? You're telling me not only do I need to be kind to people that I don't particularly like, I have to be like him. That Samaritan can't ever be like me. Jesus keeps replacing their legalistic system of morality with mercy. Even the ones you hate can still act in love. No one is beyond His redemption. And we can see how scandalous this was for Jesus, but the reality of this story is that there's no one in today's culture that this is more scandalous for than believers, than Christians. We hear this story and we're like, well, praise God for that Samaritan. I'm so thankful that Jesus used that Samaritan as an example, and we're just supposed to love people. But we don't have anything against the Samaritan. We don't have any reason to think why that's, we know that they didn't like him, but I don't have anything. And we don't see ourselves in the priest or the Levite. Nah, I'm not that guy. I would help if I were in that scenario. But let's take a minute and see how we can avoid being the priest and the Levite. Go and do likewise. I'm going to kind of roll that into, we had last Sunday night, we had a partners meeting. It was a good meeting. We did some leadership discussion. We talked about some of the things coming up. I talked about Buy a Tree, Change a Life. We talked about some of the protocols that we're going through. There was some good feedback. It was a good time. So how do we go and do likewise? Man, we've got a great group of volunteers here. Lindsay and I were sitting there discussing last night. She was going through Planning Center, and if you know what Planning Center is, then you know. If you don't, Planning Center is the computer program that we use that helps schedule everybody for all the different areas where they're plugged in. And she was looking, and she's like, wow, man, everybody kind of has their stuff together. We have volunteers all the way through almost the end of November. And that's exciting. People are responding. People are doing it. And this is great. They're stepping up and they're serving. That's the way it's supposed to be. We still have need for more of that. Look, we got a nursery program that is amazing. Lauren does a great job with our babies. My kids volunteer in there. But some people may not even realize this. Our nursery is broken into 2 separate ages, 2 separate age groups. Because it goes all the way up until like 3 or 4 years old. I don't remember what the age group is. But can you imagine having a 4-year-old and a newborn playing together? They're babies, but they're not the same. And it's difficult, so we need to separate that. So while we have some people who are doing a great job working in our nursery, we need more people who can come and take one of those age groups and be able to separate those so that it can be a safer environment for our kids. And that's a great problem to have. We have a lot of kids, so much so that we need to divide it. That is a blessing to have as a problem. I will take that over other church problems all day. But that's a way. But what happens is the priest's attitude was like, I gave it the office. I've done my time in the nursery. It's someone else's turn to serve. Another way is by volunteering to help in one of the unglamorous roles. Look, I stood out between services after first service, stood out there shaking hands, or not really, so doing fist pumps. But I started just pouring sweat at like 10 o'clock in the morning, and I'm like, man, it was 10:15, I'm standing out there, and I'm drenched. I'm like, why is it? Well, we need unglamorous people. No, I said that wrong. We need people in these unglamorous roles. I'm the unglamorous people. Y'all are beautiful. Put the shovel down, Pastor, I know. We need people to work in these unglamorous roles, the ones who will be willing to allow themselves to get sweaty, to go out there and work in the parking. So when people pull into the property, they go and meet them at their car. And if a mom is getting out and she has a bunch of babies, that you help out with that. And don't just go run grab somebody's baby, but help them out however you. Hi, I'm here for your baby. No. No. We approach them with love. We approach them with a humble heart of service that we want to help serve them. And we help them come in. If there's guests that are here, we help them walk them to where they need to be. There are a lot of areas that we can serve. A lot of areas. If you're good with techie stuff, we need people who can learn our media system, who can help on the cameras. We have people who are watching online right now. Just last week, we had 50 different devices connected online. And when we were in the shutdown, we had as many as like 600 people who were watching us online. Now that we're back, there's a little bit less that are watching online, and we want to encourage those of you who when you're able, we would love to have you here in service with us. But as long as you're continuing to watch online, we want to give you the best possible church experience that you can where you are. If you're at home for health reasons, or if you are in another state, but you consider this your church home, you're part of our online campus, and we need people who can help out with that, to do the best that we can do, to be the best that we can be. The more we lose ourselves in serving, the more we find ourselves in Christ. We look more like Jesus when we're serving others. So the more you lose yourself in serving, the more you find yourself in Christ. Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, washed the feet of the disciples. Even Peter, who would deny him later on. Even Judas, who had sold him out and betrayed him. He served them. Knowing what was coming, Jesus still served them. But here's the other part, though. Here's what's dangerous about serving at church. I mentioned it a minute ago. It can give us that sense of, I gave it the office. The priest was doing good by being a priest. The priest was not a Pharisee. Again, he was the one who was helping the widows and the orphans. But how are we going to respond when someone is in need outside the church? That shows what's going on in here. I'm not just preaching this for you. I'm preaching this for me. Every service, every Sunday, I'm not the running, jumping, spitting, snorting. There's a pastor or an evangelist that I've known since I was a kid. I was 11 years old, and they call him Jumpin' John because he would get to dancing and he would jump and do spins but I'm telling you, I can't do that. By the end of the service, he is head to toe completely drenched in sweat. That's not my style. I can't be that. However, even with my style, every Sunday I am spent. My back hurts. It is in knots. And I pray, Lord, relieve it, take it. And what ends up happening, I'll go home, we'll go out to eat, I'll go home, I'll lay down and just decompress for a while. But the reality, what really shows our heart is how we deal with things outside this building. So I don't want to fall into the trap of, well, man, I am so spent because I just preached all morning. I preached 2 services and I just don't have enough in me. No, if there's an opportunity that I need to be able to serve someone outside this building later on a Sunday, I have to be sensitive. And if I want to be like Jesus, I have to be willing to allow that to happen. The oil and the wine were given to us for a reason. The priest and the Levite knew about the oil and the wine because they were used in the temple. They used it every day. While they used it every day in the temple, they did what they thought was pleasing to God. They were going through the ritual. The one who really used it in the way that was pleasing to God was the Samaritan. Josiah, would you come? God isn't looking for ritual or sacrifice. Obedience is better than sacrifice. The goal of our Christian life is to love God with everything that is within us and to love others as He loves us. We're imitating Him when we become merciful people. So we put ourselves in the position of this young lawyer, and we ask the question, who's my neighbor? If people are hurting, help them. No qualifications, no strings attached. Don't help them as long as they show initiative. Don't ask someone's immigration status before you decide to show them mercy. When someone's house is on fire, that's not the time to haggle over the price of the hose. Help someone in need because you can. The meat of this text is the story of the wounded man and how people responded to him. But don't miss this. In Matthew 25, Jesus, he's talking about the parable of the sheep and the goats, and he's talking about how, whenever you give someone food and drink and visit them, whenever you do any of this to the least of these, you're doing it to me. When you see someone in need, don't worry if they're ever going to come to church or not. I've been convicted in certain moments because I've been taken advantage of for times. There's been people who will come up and say, man, I just need some gas in my car to make it to Sarasota. You know what I'll do? I'll take them over to the gas station across the way, 7-Eleven, fill up their tank. And then it follows up with, yeah, but I haven't eaten. I need some food too. And there's this little voice in the back of my head saying, they just want money. They're just going to go buy booze. They're just going to go blow it on drugs. Don't give it to them. You're enabling them. And then that still small voice of the Spirit will speak to me and say, you do what you can do, and what they do with it is between them and me. Yes, sir. Whether or not they were actually going to Sarasota or Ocala, that's usually the two places when people are trying to get somewhere. Those are the two places. And in those moments, it doesn't matter. I do what God tells me to do, and I let Him take care of the things that I can't. That's why it says in Hebrews, when we help people, we might be entertaining angels unaware. When I see a wounded person, I might be looking at Christ Himself. The challenge is, will we care for Jesus this way? Because when you look at somebody else, regardless of the color of their skin, regardless of their financial situation or their past, they are created in the image of God, same as you. One last thing. One thing remains as we go with the song that we did earlier. Sometimes we see ourselves as the priest or the Levite, and I told you how I like to see myself in a narrative. When I'm reading a book, I see myself as one of the characters. I like to see myself as the protagonist, not the antagonist. I want to be the hero, not the villain. But sometimes we'll actually see ourselves as the priest or the Levite, and sometimes we'll see ourselves as a Samaritan. I'm being humble here so I can see myself as the bad guy. You know what? I'm going to say I've done good, so I see myself as a Samaritan. And Jesus, we'll see Jesus as the wounded man because He was the one whose body was broken. There's this man who's been beaten and laying on the side of the road, and he's bleeding to death. I'm going to tell you the reality of this story. The one who is beaten and laying on the side of the road, that's you. That's me. We're not the other people. Sure, we might have those characteristics from time to time, but we are the ones in need of rescue. We're laying there dead, and we see the law coming down the road. And the law is coming, and it sees us from a distance, and the law is so perfect, and the law is so right that it can't get within 6 feet of us, so the law passes us by. And right after the law, we see the prophets coming. And we hear the prophets and the words that they're saying, and they're beautiful, but we just can't seem to get within 6 feet of us either. So the prophet just passes us by. We're challenged. We're moved by what the prophets are saying, but they're unable to meet us where we are. The prophets are unable to heal us in our moments of brokenness. The law and the prophets are there. But the reality is, God sends Jesus as the Good Samaritan, and he's the one who meets us in our place of need. He's the one who finds us on the side of the road beaten. He's the one who finds us sick and dying in our sin and carries us up, and he loves us, and he's the Good Samaritan. Jesus, the one who was rejected by his own people. Jesus, the one whose very disciples denied him on the night that he was betrayed. Jesus, the one who was crucified outside the town. When he was put on trial, Pilate said, I find no fault in him. But they said, crucify him. And in that moment, Pilate was like, okay, well, I know you guys kind of have this ritual here. So I have this prisoner, this domestic terrorist, this zealot, that Barabbas, you can have him, or I can give you Jesus, and you know, he hasn't done anything wrong. And they're like, no, we want him because he's going to deliver the political win that we want. Barabbas is the zealot. He's going to overthrow Rome. He's going to overthrow the oppressor. So we want that, and we're going to reject Jesus. Crucify him. Crucify the innocent one and give us this over here because this makes our situation better. And they rejected Jesus, and he, the one who was rejected, is the one who did it for us. He's the one who found us on the side of the road. He healed us. He restored us, and he comes and does what the law and the prophets were unable to do. That's why when Jesus was asked, no, I am not here to replace the law and the prophets. I am here to fulfill. I am here to carry on what the foundation was laid, but they couldn't do. I'm here to fulfill it. And he picks us up, and he binds us, and he takes us to the inn. He takes us to the church. And he pours his oil and his wine on us. What is the oil? The oil is the anointing of his Spirit. He pours that out on us. What is the wine? It is the communion, the fellowship with him that we partook in earlier on in this service. We have that access to him. He pays the innkeeper. He stays the night. He risks the danger. He is the Good Samaritan. Will you stand? And he ends that entire teaching with the words that put out a hit on him, with the words that made people so uncomfortable. Go ye therefore and do likewise. Go